to have experts. I know I saw the list of experts who are going to talk about innovations and strategies, but I'm really going to talk about what makes innovations and strategies actually work. So I'm really going to talk about mindsets and attitudes, because in changing ourselves and preparing ourselves with the right mindset and attitude, we may have an opportunity to really take advantage of what VUCA offers and therefore truly win. And I just checked with the organizers, and they said it's all right if I take a question or two at the end of the exercise. So 15 to 20 minutes, I won't take longer than that. And then if it's interesting, then I'll be happy to take on a couple of questions. Is that okay? Right. I was over the last 2 days, somebody said, will you come to Khandala? So I actually was at Khandala on Friday and Saturday. And I was with another university, with the chancellor of the university, the vice chancellor, the pro-vice chancellor, registrar, all the deans and directors of various schools, plus about 10 faculty, young and senior faculty there. And the purpose of the two-day exercise, I was a facilitator, the purpose of the two-day exercise was to really rethink the university, And this all started off because I was invited to a board meeting of the university, and I went and said the university as is conventionally understood has begun dying. Now, don't take this too seriously, right? The moment we are born, we start dying. That looks very cynical, isn't it? But in a sense, it's true, right? Universities also. Now, the model that we have today is a 400-plus-year-old model of universities, which was originally by Harvard University. If those of you are interested in understanding how universities have transformed, I would urge you to read Innovative University by Clayton Christensen. If you ever get a chance, please read it. Or if you like to read and understand more about universities and their transformation, read any of the books. He's written about 6 or 7 books by Dr. Derek Bock, who is one of the former presidents of Harvard University. Extraordinary works. Now, Clayton Christensen actually outlines the way in his book how Harvard University had started, and the model that Harvard University at that point had started is the model that we follow across the world for the most part even today. For example, why would semesters have to start, or a year has to start in the month of July? It seems to be quite, or August in the US. It seems quite strange. Why can't it start right through the year? One of the interesting things that I did, and my team did in my prior stint at Manipal University, is actually set up intake of students every quarter, right? And we were working towards saying anybody should be able to join a university for a bachelor's or a master's program any time of the year, right? The old paradigm started off because young people used to work in the fields, work in the farms during spring and early summer. And they actually used to come to study in universities, mid to late summer. And that really was the principle behind which the whole thing started. But that's today become pretty much a set pattern that universities follow. Professor Manwani spoke about the fact that everything is changing, and I think it's important for us to go back and pay some attention to it, because it's important for several reasons. It's important not only because of the amount of possibilities it's going to throw, it's important because what we have got used to as the ground on which we stand, the world on which we stand, is not going to exist tomorrow, and it's going to change at such a rapid pace. It's going to become very difficult for us to understand. VUCA is a term that was coined by the US Army, as lots of things in management. The hierarchical structure, to give you an example, the concept of cells. We pick up a lot from the armed forces, and VUCA is a term that was picked up. It was originally referred to by the US Army War College at Carlisle in Pennsylvania. That's where the term started. And it really was a term that was coined to reflect the ground realities the US Army was facing in Afghanistan, right? Because they were facing volatility, they were facing uncertainty, they were facing complexity that they had never encountered before, and of course complete ambiguity. And an armed forces which was trained and considered to be best in the world by a long mile, which was very proud of its systems and processes and a structure and a way of doing things, suddenly found itself completely unable to tackle the situation. Sounds very familiar from a real world, isn't it? And that's really reflective of what's happening today. Let's just take a couple of examples to understand. India adds 12 million people to the workforce every year. 12 million people to the workforce every year. Now that's half the size of Australia. So half the population of Australia is getting added to the workforce here in India. We need a growth rate of 5.5% or so of the GDP just to maintain the current level of unemployment. We have about 700 to 800 channels, many of them free to air, which today has democratized aspirations. The young person who's in the village, who's in rural India, is exposed to the same triggers that raises aspirations as the young person in the urban milieu. The young person from disadvantaged sections of society are exposed to the same catalysts that impact and impinge desires and aspirations in young people in more affluent families and circumstances. There is therefore democratization of aspiration, and it's an extraordinary powerful thing. And the reason why I get excited, I'm an incurable optimist, and I am absolutely excited with what's India going to be like going forward. And the fundamental reason, many reasons, but the most fundamental reason I get excited is this democratization of aspiration. Young India is increasingly getting more and more ready, potentially speaking, to really transform itself and transform the country and move to a different, era altogether. But to be able to do that, understanding of VUCA therefore becomes critical. So the pace of change today is far more than our ability to, to respond easily. And that's one of the big leadership challenges. When we teach management education, we teach this as a matter of routine. And, since Professor Manwani again quoted Naisbitt, so I just picked up an interesting quote from Naisbitt on the net when I'm sitting there. Look at the pace of response. I listened to him and I actually picked up a quote from Naisbitt. It says, "Trends, like horses, are much easier to ride if you go in the direction that they are heading." So the trend today is towards pace, speed, uncertainty, and therefore a lot of possibilities as well. The perspective that we face today from a volatility context is that we are very unclear about today's context and certainly unclear about tomorrow's outcomes. And that means that we have to handle an overload of information and noise. The amount of data that gets added worldwide, it's doubling every year, and it's just increasing at an extraordinary pace. We need to have the ability to sift through these mounds of complicated data and extract what's going to be relevant to us. Today, the volatility and uncertainty also means that as people and as leaders, we find it very difficult to get a handle on what's really happening. So in this conversation I had the last 2 days, we talked about this particular university is being very successful in creating programs for young entrepreneurs. And I was talking to the professor who had actually created the program and run it successfully now for 14 years. And two things came out very nicely. One, the fact that these young entrepreneurs, most of them sons and daughters of people who run family businesses. And it's interesting, it's sons and daughters. 32% of her enrollment is actually women, which is very, very pleasing. It should become 50-50, but someday it will. So it's family businesses today are preparing their daughters, to take over businesses. And the one thing that collectively she was mentioning that each of the students comes and speaks to her about is the fact that their parents refuse to change. She was saying that the big complaint that they had is, "You're teaching all these things to us. What is the relevance of this if the parents that we go back and start working in the context of our families don't want to change?" A bulk of the objections and the bulk of the barriers to transformation that's there is actually placed by the older people, like all of us, most of us. And a leader typically tends to withdraw herself or himself into a corner, and therefore, when she or he finds it extremely difficult to handle the situation. Leaders find it difficulty because of the complexity, is because of the sheer amount of information and complexity that's out there. They find it very difficult because we have been taught, management programs teach us to look at probabilities, right? If you're an engineer, it's even worse. And I was just talking about this. We are taught to say 1, 2, 3, 4, and therefore 5. We are taught tools. We are asked to rely on tools. We are told that there is this balanced scorecard as a tool or something else as a tool. So we are taught to rely on tools. What we often don't teach, or as students often we don't learn, is that what we need to do is to understand the method of applying the tool in the context of where we are and what we face, and that's technique. We don't teach techniques, we teach tools. We learn tools, we don't learn techniques. So both ways, it's a big challenge. When I was stepping back and starting to look at VUCA as a whole, some 3-4 things struck me. And this is something that I was sharing with the people that were out there, the teachers that were out there. Every one of us, and how many of us here are more than 40 years of age? May I have a show of hands? More than 40 years of age? Right. It's about half the audience here. Anybody above 40 years of age has been brought up, either completely or partially, in an environment that focused on scarcity, right? So when I grew up, we had to wait for a gas connection for 8 years. When I grew up, a telephone connection meant we had to wait for 12 years. When I grew up, color televisions did not exist. In fact, black and white televisions did not exist in any house. So it was absolutely okay for a complete stranger to walk into your house if you had a black and white TV, to sit down and listen to, what is that, Chitrahar, is it? Whatever is the program that used to come, or the Sunday movie. It's perfectly all right. We grew up in an era where Bajaj scooter, which sometimes if you have to start, you have to bend it down and put it up before you kick and start. You know that? You've probably seen that. That Bajaj scooter, you have to wait for 15 years. A car was known as a pleasure. It's called a pleasure car because it is a pleasure to see it. Forget about riding in it. We grew up in an era where higher education seats in good institutions were not available. Jain University did not exist. We have to scramble around to get, because admissions or seats in good institutions, for that matter even average institutions, were scarce. Every one of us grew up in an era of scarcity. Just want to place in front of all of you what, and it's maybe because of VUCA, maybe VUCA is something that happened independently. Contextually today we need to think completely differently. We live today in a world, and we will continue to live increasingly in a world that's abundant. Our thinking is totally dominated by the fact that we go up in scarcity. We must look at the world where many things are going to be abundant. For example, would you even imagined for a country which used to wait just a few years back for 10-12 years to get a telephone connection to have 900 million telephone connections? Would you have imagined that? Would you have imagined today speaking to somebody else, to all your connections and contacts, the cost of speaking has become so cheap that it's abundantly available? Would you imagine today information be abundantly available? A graduate engineer or a graduate student distinguish herself from somebody else because she knew, others didn't. Information was the differentiator. There was scarcity of information everywhere else that made these people stand out and stand up. Today information is available in plenty. Have you all seen this advertisement series called the Idea Internet Network, IIN? It's an advertisement, and I don't know how good idea is on that, but the point that they're communicating is extremely valid. Information is abundant today. Jeremy Rifkin famously said that India is the Saudi Arabia of alternate energy. It's therefore, assuming that our government doesn't muck up, I was absolutely delighted to hear Arun Jaitley talk about, I don't know how many megawatts of, more than 100,000 megawatts of power to be produced through alternate energy over the next few years. If the government doesn't muck up, we actually may end up in an era where energy will be available in abundance. Now, not everything is going to be available in abundance. I think water is going to be in shortage. There are going to be other challenges as well. Common sense is not going to be in abundance. It will continue to be scarce. That itself raises a lot of opportunity, doesn't it? But we are really going to transform to a world where there's abundance of many things, and there is going to be abundance of ideas. Abundance of energy to execute the ideas into reality. If you have to actually understand the movement towards this world, we must understand what VUCA brings there as well. Because in addition to this abundance, it's going to multiply possibilities because of VUCA, because of the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, all of which I am referring to in a positive sense. Every one of those 4 terms I'm referring to in a positive sense. How do you tackle it? We need the right mindset and attitude to do so. When we grew up, when I grew up coming from a low middle class family, you got an opportunity, you studied well, you finish your school, you get an engineering or a medical seat, you take it, right? If you don't get engineering or medicine, maybe you do chartered accountancy or law. That's it. These are the 4, options that were available to you. Nothing else besides these. Today, that's been replaced with a completely, totally different thinking which is free of constraints. We used to therefore follow the beaten path. Every one of us used to follow the beaten path, right? And there were these exceptional people. One uncle of mine, P.S. Vasu, who decided to do something dramatically different. So he was looked upon sometime with awe and, by people like me, mostly with a derision by the older people of the family circles. Usko to dekho, see what he's doing. But he traveled paths that were less traveled, isn't it? And we were all told, go down a path that is less traveled because that's the way to go, because you will get more and more opportunities. Is that not right? I just want to place in front of you, there is a third way. Certainly, following the path, the beaten path is suboptimal. Going the path that is less traveled is increasingly becoming not the differentiator. To be able to win in a world of abundance, to be able to win a world of VUCA, your attitude and mindset will have to be to create your own path. There is no path, and you have to have the ability, the thought process, and the thing to create that path. And in creating the path and moving ahead towards the destination that you have chosen for yourself, you would not only be distinctly different from everybody else, you would also be able to convert all those possibilities into reality. And that's the mindset and attitude that's really needed. There's a nice parable, I want to share two parables I want to share with you actually. Little one. It's a small story of this person with consternation on his face and really worried. His face is displaying the worry and looking around for something that he has lost. The other person comes and says, his friend comes and says, well, what happened, Anand? What happened? Why are you looking like this? Why are you so worried? The first person turns around and says, I've lost something. Being a good friend, the second person says, let me help you. What did you lose? The first person says, I lost my keys. He says, oh, I'm sure I'll be able to help you, says the second person. Where did you lose it? The first person says, I lost my key there. The second person is puzzled. You lost your key there? Why are you looking for it here? And the first person turns around and says, because the light is brighter here. Our approach to life often is in finding solutions because something is, brighter, more spoken about, and everybody is paying attention to, where the real solution lies elsewhere. I think the first mindset and attitude that can help conquer any innovation and strategy, any possibilities that VUCA throws up, is to be able to look for what you want to find in the right place. And the second parable I'm going to share with you is that of three frogs. There is a nice stream of water, and there is a log of wood that's floating on the water. Nice stream of water, there is a log of wood. There are three frogs sitting there. And one of the frogs decides to jump. How many frogs are left on the log? How many frogs are left on the log? Anybody? So 3 is one answer. Anybody says 3, 2, 1, 0? How many say 2? Anybody for 2? Come on, put up your hands. Okay, some for 2. Anybody for 1? Not very popular. Anybody for 0? Okay. The right answer is 3. You know why? Because deciding is not equal to doing. The frog has decided to jump, hasn't jumped yet. Deciding is not equal to doing. To win in the VUCA world, you must actually go out and do. Because if you don't do, it isn't really going to happen. And my only submission with all of you today, and I'll stop there, is that reflect upon the fact that what's really going to give definitive results in taking advantage of the possibilities and opportunities that are thrown up to make those strategies and innovations actually work in this world of VUCA is the right attitude and mindset. I'll just close with a quote which says, when the one great scorer comes to write against your name, the one great scorer comes to write against your name, he writes not whether you won or lost, but how you played the game. So play the game well with the right attitude, and I believe VUCA will automatically give you opportunities to win. Thank you. I'll open up for any questions if you have. Any questions? Sure.
Lots of academics over here, and we're talking about the pace of change, and a lot of research gets done, and research gets done over 3-4 years. So would you like to comment what happens to the research if the change is so rapid?
It goes without saying that if changes are so rapid, an understanding of those changes also have to be more rapid than what's been in the past. It goes without saying that